Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today is day 4 of more Duskmourn spoilers. Got some pretty exciting new cards and combos and synergies coming to standard and older formats. So let's jump right into it. Again with Hedge Shredder, which is a 4-mana vehicle 5/5. This might be one of the most broken cards in the set. I know I said that yesterday. The ley lines, maybe the ley lines are probably a little bit more broken, but this card is very strong and has a lot of combo potential. So it's a 4-mana vehicle, 5/5. When it attacks, you can mill 2 cards. And there's a middle ability. Whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from the library, put them onto the battlefield tapped. And you can crew it for 1. So what this means is that anytime you mill a land from your deck or surveil a land into your graveyard from the top of your deck, that card just goes straight into play. So you can see how there's sort of this infinite loop with Hedron Crab, for example. Whenever you play, if you had both of these in play and you had played a land, you can choose to mill yourself with Hedron Crab. You'd mill 3, probably hit a land if you have a land in one of 3 of your cards. That land would come into play, trigger landfall, target yourself. That'd mill 3 more. You'd probably hit at least 1 land. If you hit 2 lands, you can kind of continue to do that. If you have enough landfall triggers here that you can just mill out your whole deck and mill out your entire opponent's deck. Say if you had 40 lands in your deck and you had both of those, you play 1 land and then mill yourself out for 40 cards and then mill your opponent out for 40 cards, something along those lines. Kind of depends on how many lands you have. You kind of have to do the math, but that is one option. Also, if you had like Valakut in your deck and you just hit a bunch of mountains and Valakut, and they all come into play at the same time, that could be an instant win. So that is a modern legal combo, which could be quite good and only just takes, all you have to do is play 1 land or just crew this and attack to mill, and you'll probably hit a land and a land will come to play, and that'll kind of trigger this combo that essentially puts all the lands from your deck into play. In standard and also in other formats, if you wanted to play just like a bunch of surveil lands in your deck with this card, with the Hedge Shredder, that could be pretty sweet, because surveil lands, when they come into play, you look at the top card, you could mill the top card. If it's a land, that'll come into play, and if it's a surveil land, then it'll trigger again. And then you look at the top card. If it's a land, it comes into play. If it's a surveil land, then you can look at the top card. So you can kind of see what's going. You can trigger potentially landfall quite a few times if the top cards of your library are all lands. So if you have a bunch of lands in your deck and you have anything with landfall in it, that could potentially trigger a bunch of landfall all at once. You could also, I mean, if you can crew this and attack with this as well, that can mill 2 cards, and then if both of those are lands, that will trigger landfall. So this, we have Iridescent Vinelasher and Standard. There's some other landfall cards that could be useful with this as well. So maybe you just creating a deck with a bunch of Surveil lands and Hedge Shredder, or just self-mill, which with Hedge Shredder, I think it's got some potential. This ability, I don't think has ever been printed on a card before. The one of whenever you basically whenever you mill a land, you put it into play instead of your graveyard. So that's pretty strong card for sure, and a lot of combo potential. Okay, next up we've got the Funeral Room and Awakening Hall, the new room cards. If you don't know what room cards are, you can cast either side of them, and then you can unlock the other side later in the game. So the 3-mana side, the Funeral Room, is whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So kind of like an aristocrat style effect. Perhaps you can kind of use this like with Bart in Standard to just kind of sacrifice your board, drain your opponent out. If you have like a token deck, that can be potentially useful. And then the right side, Awakening Hall, is 8 mana, and when you unlock it, you return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So kind of a game-winning play, potentially. If your graveyard is stocked, you can certainly set that up. It is 8 mana, very expensive. But there is a new card also that we got here, the Ghostly Keybearer, which is a 4-mana 3/3 Spirit Flying. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you can unlock a locked door of up to 1 target room you control. So if you played the Funeral Room on turn 3, the Ghostly Keybearer on turn 4, and then next turn you attacked, you could, for free, unlock the Awakening Hall. You can do that with all the other kind of rooms too, because some of them have a very expensive side and a very cheap side, and so something to kind of keep in mind with the Ghostly Keybearer. That can really cheat, in this case, 8 mana, basically. So it is, a little slow and not the best, like a 4 mana 3/3 flying is not very good, but that certainly has the potential to kind of cheat a lot of mana and win you the game. So something to keep an eye on. The other thing with these room cards is that their mana value is really high, and you can play them for potentially kind of cheap and get an effect. So things like Caustic Bronco, if you put this on top of your deck and then you saddle it, you can um, attack and hit them for 11 damage, I believe. It's 8 plus 3. So that would be an 11 attack. So maybe you just have like Caustic Bronco and the card that puts any. You can search your library and put it on top, and then you have like one of this in the deck, and you saddle it and just hit them for 11 out of nowhere. That would be pretty sweet, right? Maybe even like kind of play a bunch of different rooms and play Monstrous War Leech, whose power and toughness are each equal to the highest mana value. So if this is in your graveyard and you have a Monstrous War Leech out, it would be an 11/11. I don't know, maybe something to think about. Could be some janky room combo deck with that going on. But yeah, we'll have to see kind of what other kind of rooms we get and how they kind of work. But definitely some cool ideas with this one. So let's move on to the Balla Strayed Worm. That is a 5 mana 5/5, and it can't be countered, which is nice if you're hard casting this. It has Trample and Haste, so pretty good. And it has Delirium, what I think the most important part of this card has Delirium for 4, and you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Activate it only if there are 4 more cards among card types in your graveyard, only as a sorcery. So I think this card is decent just on its own as a 5 mana 5/5 trample haste. That's kind of like, I don't know, dragon stats, pretty decent, and can't be countered. It's nice. However, I think this is really quite good just as a value card in the Delirium deck. Um, obviously once you'd have Delirium, but if you just are self-milling in like a mono green self-mill or maybe green black self-mill deck, um, we have our new patchwork beastie, which is pretty sweet. Also has Delirium and then helps you mill, but it's also an artifact creature, so it kind of helps you with Delirium if you mill one of these. So we'll see kind of, again, we have to see just how easy it is to get Delirium, but I don't think it'll be that hard if you're dedicating your deck to doing it. And this is a pretty good payoff for it, just to be able to cast it from your graveyard for 4. Now, it does have a finality counter on it, so if it dies, it'll be exiled. However, there are ways of removing the finality counter. I was thinking like Glissa is kind of a nice one. That card seems to synergize with a lot of cards in this set that have counters that you want to remove. Um, so if you get in with Glissa, then you could potentially remove that finality counter from it. And then it can kind of keep coming back. You could also like blink it, and then it would remove the counter from it. There's other ways to remove counters. So and then it could just die and come back, die, and come back again. So I think this card is pretty strong, has some potential, especially in Delirium strategies. Again, we kind of have to see how easy to get Delirium, but I think it's looking like there is at least some constructed potential for a Delirium deck, and this guy I think would be definitely a part of it. Okay, next up we've got the Roller Crusher Ride, which is a 3 mana red legendary enchantment, 3 mana and X, and it has also Delirium. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player while there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, it deals double that damage instead. So what this is saying is you have to have Delirium, and then it doubles all the non-combat damage. It also has, when it enters, it deals X damage to each of up to X target creatures. So this really scales with a lot of mana, and this is a pretty cool roller coaster ride these guys are going on. Just noticing the art here, that's pretty cool. If you are ramping, that's quite good because if you're only playing this for 4 mana, you're just doing 1 damage to 1 target. For 5 mana, you're doing 2 damage to 2 targets. 6 mana, 3 damage to 3 targets. Now you're really talking. If you ramp up to 7 mana, which isn't too hard, that's kind of like attracts a range, and so definitely doable in standard if you're playing a ramp deck. That's 7 mana would be 4 damage to 4 creatures. That'd probably just be like a one-sided destroy all the creatures on your opponent's side. So I think it could be decent in a ramp deck. But it also has like some. I was trying to think, how do we kind of use all its different abilities? Delirium, again, we have to see how easy it is to get. One thing about this too is it's a legendary, so actually if you play a second copy of it, it would put the first one into the graveyard, which could actually enable Delirium, potentially. And its first ability works with the second ability. So take all the numbers I just said and double them if you have Delirium. because it's doing non-combat damage. Um, but just on the surface, that's what it's doing. And we also have, so in standard, we have the Filigree Silex, which can do 10 damage to any target. So if you double that with this, that's like 20. So that could be something, potentially kind of a 2-card combo. Kind of hard to have both enable Delirium and have 10 oil counters, but maybe something to try. It's kind of sweet with Shrapnel Blast. I was kind of thinking, are there any cards that do both non-combat damage and help you put cards in your graveyard to enable Delirium? So if you had Shrapnel Blast and you sacrifice an artifact creature or you sacrifice an artifact land, that would put 2 types in it, as the cost, and then maybe that enables Delirium, then double Shrapnel Blast for 10 damage. So that could be pretty sweet. And also, this is sort of like a burn spell, but it's also a permanent. So maybe, and it can completely sweep your opponent's board, which is pretty good if you have enough mana. Um, so maybe you just keep bouncing it back to your hand with different. There's different cards. There's that Pixie that can return permanents to your hand, or there's a new kind of blue flyer that can return permanents to your hand. But maybe the Meticulous Evacuation can return it to your hand every turn, and then you can just continually. If you have enough mana, this requires a lot of mana. But if you have a lot of mana, you can just continually bounce this and then destroy your opponent's creatures, kind of locking them out of the game. With the Meticulous Evacuation and this card. So some combo potentials there. Let me know in the comments what you think about this one. There's probably some other uses I'm not thinking about. There's a lot going on with this card at once. One. All right, next up we've got Marina's Veldrell Grimore, which is a 6-mana legendary artifact, and when it enters, if you cast it, draw 5 cards. You have no maximum hand size and don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. Okay, pretty good so far. If you gain life, draw that many cards. Also pretty sweet. And whenever you lose life, discard that many cards. Then if you have no cards in hand, you lose the game. Uh-oh. So that's the drawback. This card is pretty cool, pretty interesting. I was thinking if you have Shelly out here on the right, that's whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. And then this effect is whenever you gain life, you draw that many cards. It kind of creates an infinite loop, which is pretty sweet for you if you have both of those cards out. However, the problem is you would continually draw cards and you just deck yourself and lose. So you'd have to have some way of sacrificing either one of these, or donating either one of these to your opponents, in response to the triggers continually going off. So maybe the better one to sacrifice is the Shelly, because then you can keep all the cards and have a maximum hand size, have no maximum hand size. So I don't know. You could draw most of your deck and gain a ton of life, and then probably win from there, because then your life total would be the number of cards that you have in your hand. So that's some idea of kind of going somewhat infinite with this. You can also, I was thinking it would be funny to donate this card, because you're gonna get a lot of value just by playing it, drawing 5, and then the downside is really kind of having it in play for too long, because when your hand size or your life total becomes your hand size. So if you donate it to your opponent and then you did a few damage to them, if they only had a couple cards in hand, then they just lose immediately. So the Coveted Falcon can donate permanents. Faithful Handoff can donate permanents, and this would draw you even more cards if you did that. So maybe you kind of play this and then you donate it, and then maybe you're playing in a discard deck, so their hand size is low already. Swing with the Falcon and win, hit them for 1, and then they lose. So that's some fun ideas. This card's got a lot of different things going on for it. It's pretty cool, different abilities. Yeah, let me know in the comments below any ideas you guys have for this one. Seems like a fun one. It is 6 mana. There maybe are some ways to sort of cast it for free, cheat it into play. You only get the card draw if you cast it. So you kind of have to play things that can cast things for free, but to get that effect going. But there are certainly ways of sort of cheating it into play if you wanted to do that too. Not sure if that's quite worth it, but yeah, this is definitely an interesting card for sure, and has some combo potential. All right, so now we've got some lower rarity cards. We've got the Cynical Loner, which is a 2-mana 3/1. It is a survivor, a human survivor. Can't be blocked by glimmers. Not sure how relevant that line attack is going to be. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of glimmers. Maybe in limited, that's pretty relevant, but yeah. So a little bit of evasion, but not much, and has survival. So at the beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, you can search your library for a card and put it into your graveyard and shuffle. Whoa. So that is quite a line of text, and that is not something you see. That's Entomb basically, and you can essentially do that every turn if you have a way to tap this guy. Now, of course, you can just attack with it, and if it doesn't get blocked, then the second main phase you can search for anything. So it's pretty decent with just like removal spells and getting in with it. Um, but there are other ways to just kind of tap it, like all the survival cards. Maybe you just want to find ways to tap it. The uh, Citannual Stalwart. I totally forgot about this card, but this is a pretty decent one with this. Pronounced it wrong, but it's a 1 mana 1/1, and you can tap an untapped artifact or creature to add 1 mana of any color. So it works pretty well with survival cards, especially this guy. If you go turn 1 Stalwart, turn 2 Cynical Loner, then just tap it for a mana. You could, I don't know, play Thoughtseize or something else, or just nothing. And then second main phase, Entomb, search for anything you want, put it into your graveyard. And then the next turn you could tap this for an extra mana and play in a reanimation spell on the thing you just searched for. Um, so definitely some cool potential, I would think, with this guy. It also kind of works with the Hedge Shredder that we talked about earlier, because it can crew it to search for anything, and then if you put a land into your graveyard, it goes directly back into play with the Hedge Shredder. So that's kind of cool. Um, I was thinking also, I mean, vehicles are a pretty good way, but also saddle. Um, there's the Bronco, which is nice, but it kind of synergizes nicely with the Archmage's Newt because when it deals combat damage to a player, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. Flashback cost is equal to its mana cost, and it gains flashback 0 if it's saddled. So being able to saddle it taps it, and then second main phase you could search something to put into your graveyard, and then the Newt, you couldn't really do it exactly on that same turn because it's the second main phase that it triggers, but the following turn you could, whatever you searched into the graveyard, you could maybe cast if with the Newt if you were able to get in with a Newt. So there's some synergy there. You know, other saddle cards are available in standard that work with this, and also just attacking with it is a 3/1. So I think this card's pretty strong, especially any deck that has sort of graveyard synergies. This effect of being able to put a card any search your library and put it directly into your graveyard is quite powerful and strong. So definitely a card to keep an eye on. Okay, next up we've got another room card, which is an enchantment, a 1 mana bottomless pool on the left side here. And it says whenever you unlock that, you return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand. So you can kind of use this, I thought, with creatures that bounce things back to their hand, kind of reuse the bounce ability, which could be kind of sweet. And so we've got the Fear of Isolation, which is a new one, and we've got the Nurturing Pixie, which also bounces something. Um, so you could actually, now I'm just thinking about this too, you could bounce your own Nurturing Pixie, returns up to 1 target creature. Yeah. So if you had a Nurturing Pixie, you could use this to return the Nurturing Pixie, and then you could play the Nurturing Pixie to return the Bottomless Pool, and then you could use the Bottomless Pool to return the Nurturing, and then you could do that with Fear of Isolation. So you could kind of continually loop all of these, which would be kind of cool to just continually trigger comes into play abilities whenever enchantment comes into play, the eerie abilities. You could also just kind of reuse it to bounce multiple of your opponent's stuff. And then the right side, the Locker Room, which is a 5 mana um, enchantment. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Also works pretty well with these cards because they have flying and some evasion, so you can kind of get in and draw extra cards. So maybe this kind of blue-white synergy deck works to some extent. You can kind of just like bounce a bunch of stuff, get in, draw extra cards. Yeah, who knows? All right, next up we've got Threats Around Every Corner, which is a 4 mana enchantment, and when it enters, you manifest Dread. So that means you look at the top 2 cards of your library, you put one of them face down as a 2/2 creature, and you can flip it up for its mana cost if it's a creature. And then it says whenever a face down permanent you control enters, search your library for a basic land, put it into play tapped, and shuffle. So ramps you by itself. So by itself, this just gets you a 2/2 manifest Dread, and then also gets you a land. So kind of decent if you hit like a big creature. This sets you up to flip it over if it costs 6 mana or something like that the next turn, which is kind of cool. But also works with obviously other manifest Dread triggers. So if you went like turn 3 Hauntwood Shrieker and then you played this, got a manifest Dread attacked, Um, got a Manifest Dread. Both of those Manifest Dreads would trigger the search your library for a land card trigger, and that would be, excuse me, pretty good. And then also Cryptic Coat is kind of nice because that anything with disguise or with cloaking also works because those are face down permanents. And Cryptic Coat you can kind of bounce back to your hand and play it again. So you could kind of trigger this over and over again to continually cloak things. So it would be interesting, and then that would give you more mana to do it again and again and again. Um, yeah, it's card. I don't know. I mean, it's a little slow and maybe not exactly what you were doing, but it does have some interesting synergies and something to keep an eye on. We are going to have to, again, see what how many different Manifest Dread cards we get in the set, and then evaluate from there how good the card is. Because if there is a lot of like really cheap Manifest Dread cards, then this is pretty good actually to just kind of use those to get more lands out of your deck. So all right, next up we've got the Fear of Infinity, which is an interesting one. I think this is some sort of creature attacking its own tail, eating its own tail. So kind of cool, really cool art here. And it is a blue-black 3-mana enchantment creature, Nightmare 2/2. It's got flying and lifelink, so not bad, but it can't block. I can see why they didn't put it can't block, because it has Eerie whenever enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand. So it's kind of cool. Like on the surface, it's just kind of a lifelink flyer that could kind of get in, gain you some life, die, and then return. But I was thinking maybe there's some other ways of like using this in combos as just like a way to like a thing you like discard. Um, so there are enchantments that come into play that make you discard things, and then it also says whenever an enchantment comes into play, you could return it from your hand. And Artist Talent in particular is kind of cool because it's whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can discard a card, and if you do, draw a card. So if you had this in your hand, if you play Artist Talent, you have this in your hand, and you played um, basically anything. You cast another enchantment, a 1-mana enchantment, for example, and you discarded this, and then you draw a card. Then the enchantment would come into play, and then you return the Fear of Infinity back to your hand, right? So then you could do that again. You could play another 1-mana enchantment, discard the Fear of Infinity, draw a card, and then it'd come back to your hand. So you kind of would negate the downside of the Artist Talent, and then just is basically just a draw engine at that point. It's also kind of cool with Insidious Roots. I mean, if you even added Insidious Roots to this and maybe a 3-color, 4-color deck, something like that, because every time you did that loop, you'd also get a plant because this is counting as a creature that is leaving your graveyard. So that is kind of cool. So maybe there's some synergy there with Insidious Roots. Insidious Roots itself is also an enchantment, so kind of interesting synergies potentially there, and then gives you more mana to kind of do it again next turn maybe. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think of Fear of Infinity. Kind of a cool card, kind of interesting. All right, last up we've got the Floodpit Drowner, which is a 2-mana 2/1 Merfolk, which has got Flash, Vigilance, and when it enters, tap target creature and opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. And then you can pay 2, tap it, and you shuffle it and target creature with a stun counter on it into their owner's library. So kind of cool. It's got a lot of abilities. At first glance, it kind of looks like maybe it's a limited card, but there are some Merfolk strategies potentially in Standard. I mean, there hasn't really been, but there is a Merfolk Lord, which is pretty good. The Voldaren Hexcatcher, which also has Flash, and the Deep Root Pilgrimage, which works with Merfolk. It's a bit awkward that this has Vigilance, so it doesn't actually tap to attack, which you kind of actually want for the Deep Root Pilgrimage, but it does tap to use its ability. So if you use its ability, you would also get a token with the Deep Root Pilgrimage, I believe. But on rate, this card's pretty good, I think, just as a flash, kind of tap your guy during your turn, keep it tapped for another turn, get in for a few damage, but also can work with Merfolk. And then, if it has the next turn, if you really want to remove that creature, you can pay 2 to completely remove it or have it shuffle back in. So kind of an interesting card for sure. And maybe this makes Merfolk a little bit more viable. Hopefully we'll get some more Merfolk. We'll see kind of how the set plays out. But yeah, just some ideas with the Floodpit Drowner. Okay, so that is it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate all the likes, comments that I've been getting from these preview videos. I'm really excited for Duskmourn. Let me know what you're building, other combos that you're excited for, anything I missed. Love to hear your ideas in the comments below. And hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.